The Tennis Gambling Podcast and the Sports Game Podcast Network is brought to you by Onyx Fantasy. Sign the promo code SGPN to claim your first-time deposit offer of bonus cash on Onyx Fantasy, promo code SGPN. We're also brought to you by Rhythm. Rhythm's college football and NFL projections are now live. Claim your set and free trial today by going to sportscampus.com. Rhythm, sportscampus.com. Those are RITHMM. And welcome, everybody, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast here on the Game Podcast Network. It is currently Tuesday morning, roughly 12:30 a.m. Eastern Time on August 13th. I'm your host, always, Scott Reichel, once again going solo for this pod. Should be a fun episode because it is time to get into another 1,000 event, time to get into Cincinnati. So we are going to preview that event with the outrights, followed by the lock and dog picks for the first round at the end of the show. Now, before we get into any of the actual preview for the tournament, do want to take care of some housekeeping. I want to remind you once again to like, subscribe on YouTube. Also, a reminder, don't forget to rate the podcast on Spotify or Apple if you are still consuming the podcast audio only on those two platforms. But I know the subscribers have been going up. I have seen some activity in the comment section, so thank you if you have been a part of that. If not, then you can definitely do so. Don't be shy. And if you are new to the show, welcome. Hopefully you enjoy the content. Either way, though, also a reminder before we get into it to check out the SGPN merch store. A lot of great Tennis Gambling Podcast merch. We have sweatshirts, we have regular shirts, and we have mugs. And I do recommend getting yourself a shirt. Very affordable and very comfortable. And I definitely think that you will enjoy the options that we have on the actual merch store. Now, not just for the tennis show, there also are some other podcasts with merchandise on that same platform. And to get into the featured show for the week, you have the Sports Game Podcast, which did launch their 32 NFL team previews, and they're giving it a $500 circa future for listeners. Plus, a reminder, you actually have some soccer starting again in the EPL. So check out the Soccer Gambling Podcast and the EPL Gambling Podcast for your soccer fix. Plus, a reminder, subscribe to get your podcast, and a reminder to download the SGPN app. Time to start off with the actual recap of what happened on Monday, both with Cincinnati, the two matches that took place, and the final in Montreal. Starting off with Montreal for the lock and dog picks. Recap, we ended up having another great episode. We had a really bad episode middle of last week. Since then, we've won all of our lock and dog picks. We are on a 3 straight episode sweep run. Hopefully keep it rolling here with this episode on Tuesday. Now for the lock, we had the under 23.5 games in the Papirin and Rublev match, minus 120. For the dog, we had the no tie breaks in the match at plus 106. So full disclosure, I did think Rublev was going to win. That did not happen. However, I did still like the under in general. I did not see each of the first two sets going to a 7-5 or a 7-6. And as a result, I did think there was some value on the under because that implies only a 3-setter would beat you. And we ended up getting the straight set win we needed from Papirin. Now, to break down the match itself, it was pretty weird because Papirin got off to a great start. Seemed like Rublev was really just out of sorts from the get-go. And then he called to the trainer. Sounded like his stomach was bothering him. I know Papirin played well for the entire tournament. But Rublev just completely no-showed the entire first set. Maybe the stomach had to do with it. Maybe it was just him being a head case again. Maybe all the above. But Papirin did a good job of really dominating from the start. He was up a break early in the second set as well, then punted it back, but then responded by going up above 40 in the following return game, and eventually did get the break, and he held on from there. So nice job by him winning his first ever 1,000 title. And I know that after the match in the, I'd say, post-match interview, he made a joke saying that his girlfriend wasn't in attendance for the first time in a while, and he won. So I don't know if that was a coincidence or not, but I found that kind of funny. Point is, though, nice win for him. And he did win an UMAG last year. Now he has a 1,000 title. Pretty underrated player in general, and it's nice to see him do well. But for Rublev's sake, I feel like it was just a weird match where I definitely didn't see that coming. You figured Papirin would be the one who was out of sorts based on having to play 2 matches on Sunday, and yet he looked as fresh as imaginable, and you ended up seeing Rublev look just once again completely just awful for the majority of the match. Kind of found his gear a bit for a little while in the second set, but then he gave the break immediately back the service game after. So it just seemed like Rublev was constantly just in an uphill climb, and he could never get out of it. But either way, nice win for us. Pretty straightforward scoreline. In fact, Papirin did win that one 6-4, 6-2. So real 6-2, 6-4, I mean. So really never in doubt for him, and kind of never in doubt for us. We had to sweat out the final service game for Papirin because he ended up having to convert his third match point as he ended up blowing the first 2. But either way, got the job done, ended up not facing a break point for the final 2 service games, and he got us over the finish line. So once again, our 3rd straight episode sweep. Very solid end to Montreal. Hopefully keep it rolling with the rest of the Masters 1000 hardcourt slate. before the U.S. Open. Anyway, before we get into any of the actual preview for Cincinnati, do want to briefly mention some of the matches, actually, that took place on Monday as well. So you had two matches taking place in Cincinnati as they pushed back the other matches to Tuesday, but Caboli ended up beating Paul in 3 sets. Fun match, very competitive, was 7-5 in the final set. Can't say that I'm too shocked because Caboli's been in great form recently as he made the final in DC, for example. Plus, we did see Paul get injured relatively early on in his last match against Nakashima, so not totally surprised that he looked a little bit, I'd say, inconsistent in the course of that matchup, and I did think Caboli was actually live to win it, just based on Paul kind of running out of gas or getting injured against Nakashima in Montreal, but plus 350 was a massive price for Caboli. I didn't cover that match on the air, but I kind of wish I did, because minus 500 was just an absurd line for Paul, who had just gotten kind of nicked up against Nakashima, and as a result, he ended up losing the match. Now, did he look injured in that match? No. But I think because of that, I would have leaned Caboli anyway, who continues to impress. That's why I've been on Caboli for the entire year. I gave him out a couple of times in the early season hardcourt slate because I really like his game, and he's translated into a potential top 20 guy. And we saw him make a final already in a 500. We'll see if he can potentially win a title at some point this year or next year. He will. He'll win a couple. He's very talented, and he got the job done against Paul here in the Monday slate. As for the other matchup, you have Khachanov, who was against Cerundolo, and he won that one 6-3, 6-0. People might be surprised by the bagel, just based on Khachanov's recent form. He was looking better in his last event. He still didn't look great. He ended up losing in a competitive straight set match to Arnaldi, who made it to the semis. But Khachanov, we know, is still a solid hardcore player. And it is worth mentioning that Cerundolo had not played for a while. Cerundolo had not played since the Olympics, but he played one match. I should say ended up losing to Ruud in the third round there. But he had not played a hardcourt match in a while because he went through the clay slate, ended up winning Umag, then he went to the Olympic time off, then he took some rest. So that was his first hardcourt match in months. So I'm not totally shocked that Khachanov beat him. 6-0, 6-3 is a pretty lopsided scoreline, but the point is I'm not surprised Cerundolo lost, and that's why Khachanov was favored in that match, despite not being in great form for the last couple of months. Besides that, nothing else to really talk about. Time to get into the actual preview for Cincinnati for the actual futures. We'll mention briefly in passing, though, a nice job by Pegula and Anisimova, who actually made it to the final in Toronto, but Pegula ended up outlasting her in the third set 6-1. It's a good one for Pegula, and we'll see if that can maybe carry over into the U.S. Open. Either way, the time to get into the futures for Cincinnati. Before we get into any of the actual futures, though, do remind me once again, there are more picks on Underdog Fantasy if you do want to go for some potential entries. If you go 8-0, you can win up to 325 times your entry. Underdog also has unique options that other books don't actually have. They have tennis options for example, aces, double faults, all this other fun stuff. So if you do want some potential extra options, Underdog has you covered. You could also use fantasy football with Underdog, with Best Ball, and Best Ball Mania is now live with $15 million of guaranteed prizes. And Underdog's also launching their season-long college football projections, higher or lower on your favorite college football players. You can now use specials on boosts and all flex entries. I'll probably end up doing something with baseball for the card on Tuesday, but you have really just an endless amount of options. I'm sure they even have preseason options for NFL if you want to be a really big degenerate, but Underdog has you covered with a lot of different options for entries. And a reminder, sign up the promo code SGPN to claim your special pick and your first deposit offer. I'll bonus cash on Fantasy, promo code SGPN. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast. Just finished recapping what happened on Monday. Time for the actual breakdown of Cincinnati. So starting off with the actual history of the event, you might remember the final last year was arguably the greatest three-set match ever played. You could argue it was either Djokovic against Alcaraz in Cincinnati or maybe Djokovic against Nadal in, I believe it was Rome, which was basically another 4-hour affair that happened on clay. Both of them were all-time matches, but that Djokovic-Alcaraz match was elite. And you saw Djokovic win that one eventually in a third-set breaker. So Djokovic is the recent winner. He will not be here for the Olympics as he is resting after the Olympics, and he's trying to potentially save his energy for the U.S. Open. Alcaraz will be here, though, as he lost in the final. Coric had the Cinderella run about a year or two ago as he was able to beat Tsitsipas in the final. I think he was 100-1 to win it that year, and he got the job done. I remember he beat Nadal in the first round. Zverev beat Rublev couple years prior. Djokovic did beat Raonic, and Medvedev did beat Goffin. So a common theme that you might have noticed based on that list, which I have to at least mention again, you have not had a repeat winner for a long time in this event. And that streak's going to continue because Djokovic isn't participating. So just keep that in mind. You tend to see a little bit of chaos. Usually the cream rises to the top. The names I've mentioned here are top-tier guys. Djokovic, Coric is kind of a shock, which is out of left field. But Zverev is still a top-5 player. Djokovic again, Medvedev. You can go down the line. Nadal won it a couple times. Federer won it a couple times. A lot of usual suspects who ended up winning this event, which is not too much of a shock since it is a Masters 1000 event where usually all the top-tier players end up playing. Now, for the sake of the actual, I'd say current form of the top guys, I do have to at least mention that it is a pretty weird event before I get into the outright odds, because there are a couple of guys who are battling some injuries or battling potential fatigue based on how long Montreal went. So I do find it pretty fascinating looking at the actual, I'd say, market for the outrights, because there's a couple of guys that I really don't trust fitness-wise going into this tournament. So I am going to pass on a couple of them. Now, to get into the actual specifics here, for the favorite, you have Alcaraz, who lost in the final last year, but he's around plus 150. Then you have Sinner, who's around 2 or 3 to 1. You can shop around, try to find a better price. I believe I did find a price that was over 3 to 1, but that's pretty rare. I think that was around plus 350 for Sinner as the highest number. Then you get to the bigger numbers. You have Medvedev at 7 to 1. Forgot to mention, by the way, I have no quarter odds for this event, so apologies and no quarter breakdowns here. Zverev is around 10 to 1. You have Rublev at around 20 to 1. Korda's around 33 to 1. I did find a 42 to 1, though. Shopping around, though, you also have Fritz at around 33 to 1 or 40 to 1. Tsitsipas at 40 to 1. You have Dimitrov is around 40 to 1. Hurkacz is around 50 to 1. Mostly 40, but I did find a 50. Ruud is around 50 after he withdrew from Montreal, so we'll see how healthy he is for it. Draper is around 50 to 1 as well. Berrettini's back. I did see around a 50 or 60 to 1 on him. Felix is around 66 to 1. You kind of get the point. So to go through my main issues with the actual field right now, I'll talk about the players that I'm eliminating from my outright pool right now. First one's going to be Sinner. Now, I know that's going to sound crazy because Sinner is a top 3 player in the world. I have to at least acknowledge he has not been in great form recently, and he's been getting injured a lot. We saw him miss the Olympics because of tonsil issues. Then he lost to Rublev in Montreal, kind of got injured there in the 3rd set. He might be fine, but after watching him kind of look a little bit compromised physically against Rublev, I don't trust his body to actually hold up right now. And I think with him being around 2 to 1 or roughly 350 on a book that kind of went awry and went rogue, I just don't want to take him. I don't trust his overall fitness, and I think that he might be a guy who could struggle to potentially maintain his overall just fitness entering the U.S. Open. I think that he might try to conserve energy if he's feeling even slightly off, and I think that could be a reason to potentially fade him in the event. Now, his draw is fine. I would not call it amazingly favorable, but it's okay. It's manageable. As a buy in the first round, then Mickelson or Griekspoor, which should be a fun first-round match as a segue. Then probably Humbert or Thompson. He should get by those. Point is, though, not exactly the greatest draw for him. He's got a shot at a Rublev in the round of 16 or Fritz in the round of 16. He should get by, but with the injury concerns recently, I just don't really want to take Sinner at that price when you have such a pretty stacked field based on how many top-tier guys are here. I know Sinner is a class above those guys when he's healthy, but he's not healthy. And I think because of that, I'm going to have to skip him. So Sinner, I will not be taking. Rublev, I will not be taking because he had to go to a final on Monday, and now he's immediately playing in this event. I don't trust the stamina, and I do think we know in general he's been pretty unpredictable so far this season. Not really a price that I'm tempted by at 25 to 1. I'm going to pass. Korda has been in good form, but I am going to pass on him as well. Just playing so much tennis, winning in D.C., then having a deep run in Montreal. Really ran out of gas there in the back half of that Papyron match in the semis. I just don't trust his fitness either right now. I am going to pass on Korda as well. Now, I have to pass on Ruud. I wasn't going to take him anyway, but Ruud has been recently just not impressing me, and we saw him withdraw from Montreal with injury in between rounds. So I question the fitness for the sake of this long event. I don't trust his ability to actually hold up physically, so I am going to pass on him there. I am going to pass on Hurkacz as well, who had a very solid showing in his first match post-Wimbledon, but he played a bunch of tennis in a pretty limited amount of time, and now he's immediately trying to recover and play another 1,000 event. I don't trust his legs and his fitness right now after missing that much time. Kind of want to see a bit more rest in between, but I think he's going to struggle, and I do think that he's going to potentially underwhelm in this event. So based on those guys that I'm eliminating, you might be wondering which guys I have left over for the sake of my actual outright picks. Starting off, I'm obviously going to be taking the favorite. Give me Alcaraz at plus 140. Yes, I know that he lost in the Olympics in the final to Djokovic. Before that match, he had not dropped a set in the entire event. It was on clay, but the point is he was very solid. Joker played incredible tennis for the entirety of that match, and even with that being the case, Alcaraz still was right there with a very solid chance of forcing a third set. He played really great tennis. I think he would have beaten anybody besides Joker on that day. But he's healthy, and we know how well he can perform in Cincinnati because he did it last year. Give me Alcaraz to make a deep run here, and I think that plus 140 is a pretty good price. I know that it's pretty, I'd say, weak of me to take the favorite, but if I'm skipping Sinner, I got to take somebody, and I think his draw is actually not that bad. So he has, for example, a bye in the first round, then Monfils or Papiron. Papiron might be completely out of gas, and Monfils is completely washed. So pretty solid draw there for the second round. Then either Rune, Berrettini, Mannarino, or Borges. So assuming it's going to be Rune or Berrettini, that's a really tough first-round matchup. Probably the first-round match of the slate, besides maybe Struff Tsitsipas. But the point is, I do think that Rune and Berrettini might kill each other, and I think that Alcaraz will be favored over either guy by a decent amount. So I am going to go with Alcaraz to get out of his immediate section. Then you're looking at probably Ruud, if I had to guess. Pretty easy draw, though. Like, I really don't think it's that bad for Alcaraz. So give me him at plus 140. For the second option, I am going to go with a guy that actually lost very early on in Montreal. He actually lost to Fokina, and I am going to go with Medvedev. I think Medvedev's draw is pretty decent. Now, the one concern would potentially be Lehecka in the second round, who has not played since May. So the argument is, how healthy is Lehecka going to be, and how is he going to look? I do not know the answer to that question. I think he might look fine. He had a great year to start the year, but I think he might be a bit rusty, and I do think that Medvedev is still in possession of a good draw, and he's rested because he did lose immediately in Montreal. If you want to skip this one, I understand it, but I think plus 750 is really not a bad price for a guy that did have a pretty solid showing against Alcaraz in, for example, the Australian, I'm trying to remember when they faced off against each other. He beat him in the U.S. Open last year, and we saw him once again look pretty solid. He won a set against Alcaraz in Wimbledon before losing in 4. He's given Alcaraz some problems. He has not really beaten him recently, and I think Alcaraz would beat him here. But 750 for a draw that I think's pretty decent is a pretty decent overall price. And you go through the draw itself, Lehecka probably in the second round, which is not bad based on the overall context behind Lehecka and this tournament. Then either Musetti, who has not played since the Olympic bronze medal game or match, Jari, Fokina, or Tiafoe. You can argue it's Fokina again. I doubt it because he retired from his last match against Arnaldi, so I don't know how healthy he actually is. But the point is, I do think Medvedev would be the favorite over any of those guys, and I do think that he is in possession of a decent draw. If you want to skip Medvedev, once again, I understand, but I'm going to give him out based on the price. Moving on, I am going to go to a guy that I do think has some value, a guy that did end up losing to Korda in a third set, say, marathon. Give me Zverev at 11-1. Pretty similar story. Unlike the Medvedev draw, his draw is actually harder, but Zverev is in decent form. He does have Khachanov in the first match, but besides that, he has a matchup against either Purcell, Makic, Busta, or Korda. Korda might be exhausted, so the rematch might not happen. We'll see if he's able to hold up physically, but I think Zverev should be in line for a decent showing. He did win the title here a couple years ago, so he does have pretty good form, and I do think his game still translates well to hard courts. To mention the head-to-head, though, between them, I will mention that Zverev is currently up. Just pulling up the head-to-head here. Zverev is currently up 3-2. Going through the recent meetings, Zverev has won the last 2 meetings in straight sets on hard court. So, face-off this year actually face-off in Miami, and in that one, you saw Zverev win pretty convincingly as he won 6-1, 6-4. So Zverev has been good this year on hard court against him, and he won the last 2 meetings on hard court in straight sets. So I think that Zverev will be able to get the job done, and I do think that Khachanov has been playing better, but facing off against Cerundolo, who had not played a hard court match in months, was a pretty favorable draw. I think Zverev gets it done, and I do think that Korda will be a sucker play based on the amount of tennis he's had to play and based on the fatigue he should be dealing with having to play back-to-back weeks in Montreal and in DC. Then you're looking at potentially facing off against Dimitrov, who has been fine. I do think Zverev would be favored in that hypothetical matchup, so I'm going to go with Zverev as well at 11-1. For my long shot, though, I am going to go with the guy that did lose pretty early on in Montreal as well, but a guy that I do think can play well here, and a guy that does have a bit of a home crowd advantage because he is American. Give me Fritz at 33-1. Now, I do think looking at the overall odds here, trying to quickly see if I could find a better price on Fritz quickly in some of these offshore markets. What can I find here on Fritz? So Fritz, I see an updated price of 40-1. So I'm actually going to change that really quickly. I see Fritz at 40-1. Now, a couple reasons why I'm going to go with him in this one. I think his draw is not that bad. We know that he has won a couple of hardcourt events recently, and we do know that he won a hardcourt event earlier this year in Delray, and we know that he has won a 1,000 event, at least one on hardcourt in his career. Solid hardcourt player in general, and I think he's been playing pretty good tennis for the last couple of months. Now, he has Nakashima in the first round, then Bolt or Fees, and I don't really trust either of those guys. Fees has been awful, and besides Hamburg, and Holt went through qualifying, but I think Fritz can beat him. I think Fritz actually lost to him in the U.S. Open a couple of years ago, but Fritz is in better form. Nakashima's fine. I think Fritz is better than either Zhang, Perricard, or Rublev. Rublev might be fully exhausted. We'll see what type of form he's in for this event. Point is, though, decent overall section for him. Then maybe Sinner in the round of 16, but Sinner might be physically compromised. I think 40-1 is a pretty decent option if you do think that Sinner might be even slightly below 100%. Maybe he drops out and tries to save his energy for the U.S. Open, but with Sinner's recent injury issues, I do think that he could be fadeable, and I think that Fritz has some value at 40-1. In reality, I am picking Alcaraz to win if I had to go for anybody because, I think he's the best player in the world right now. However, I do think there is some value looking at the injury issues of other top-tier rated guys, or at least guys that might be viewed as being threats. Once again, Montreal kind of screwed over Rublev, Korda, Papiron, and other guys because that event lasted until Monday. Hurkacz as well. Just a bunch of tennis, not enough time to recover. And I think that exhaustion might be an issue for those guys, at least in the long term. So I do think Alcaraz will probably end up winning it, but I have to mention the other guys that I think have some value based on what I think might be a weaker field than people might expect, based on all the names being there, but the form not being there. So I'm going to back some of the guys that I think have the chance of making a deep run. So once again, my outright picks for Cincinnati, I'm going to go with Alcaraz at plus 140. I'm going to go with Medvedev at plus 750. I'm going to go with Zverev at 11-1, and I am going to go with Fritz at 40-1. A pretty decent collection of guys that have had hardcourt success in the past and guys that can have really solid runs if everything starts clicking. But I think that Alcaraz is probably the guy to beat here, so I am going to go with him. I actually found plus 150, so I'll fix that price really quickly. So give me Alcaraz as my main choice of plus 150, Medvedev 750, 11-1 on Zverev, 40-1 on Fritz, and that is going to wrap it up. Apologies again that I have no quarter odds, and not really my fault. It is what it is. I didn't even have quarter odds yesterday when I checked because qualifying's still going on, and you had a couple matches today. Point is, though, that's going to do it for the actual outrights. Now it's time for the lock and dog picks for the first round. But before any of that one, remember once again, they were brought to you by Rhythm, because Rhythm does have a bunch of models for you to use for college football and for the NFL. Create your own winning betting model or let Rhythm do it for you. You can decide what stats matter to you, and Rhythm will help you build the custom model around it. Or you can just let Rhythm and its predictive model do the heavy lifting. Rhythm also uses AI projections from MIT data scientists, and they already have you covered for NFL Week 1 and college football Week 0. Claim your 7-day free trial today by going to sportscampus.com. Rhythm, sportscampus.com. RTHMM. We're also brought to you by Circuit Survivor and Circuit Millions. Circuit Sports is back with Circuit Survivor and Circuit Millions with $16 million in guaranteed prizes. The numbers are booked for Las Vegas for football. What are you waiting for? Ultimate Cuts weekend is a great time to go. You can hang out with Ryan and Sean and enjoy some of the open bar events at the World's Best Sportsbook from August 22nd through the 24th. Use promo code SGP15. Save you 15% off your hotel room for sign-up weekend. And a reminder, sign up in person in Circuit Sports for you now and September 7th. And use a proxy play from anywhere. We even have a deal with a proxy. If you go to proxy.footballcontest.com, we can save you $50 with the promo code SGP. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast. Just finished going through the outrights for Cincinnati. Now it's time for the lock and dog picks. For the lock, I am going to do something that I've not done in a while. I'm going to do a parlay. And for this one, I actually am going to back Leheshka, who has not played in a while, but he's against Navone, who, as far as I'm concerned, is an auto fade on hard court. And as a result, I am going to put him in the money line parlay. The second play will be Borges on the money line. He's kind of grown on me over the last couple of months. Those two together, parlayed around minus 129 on FanDuel, I believe. So starting off with Leheshka, Navone's never won an ATP hardcourt match. I mentioned this exact same stat when I faded him against Fritz in the first round of Montreal, and he lost pretty comfortably. Lehecka, though, has not played since May, but he won a hard court in Australia earlier this year. He was in great form before the injury, and I do think that his upside is definitely there. He's a really underrated player, and I do think that he has just significantly more talent than Navone on hard court. The issue, obviously, is going to be the rust, because he hasn't played in a couple months. But if he looks anywhere near as good as he did earlier this year, he's going to win in straight sets. Now, the reason why I stayed away from the straight sets is wondering if he's going to start off rusty. Maybe Navone actually gets something going early. The issue is, though, Lehecka, if he finds his serve, is a significantly better server. Navone is an awful server, objectively speaking. And I do think you're looking at a guy who is definitely going to be aggressive in his first match back, and if rust is not going to be an issue, he should win comfortably. Even with rust, once he shakes it off in maybe the first set, I do think he has enough firepower to really push Navone around on hard court, and I do think there's some value with his money line. Now, for Borges, pretty simple. He's been in good form. We saw him win ATP title. We saw him go through qualifying here in Cincinnati. He's been in very good form for the last couple months. Now, Mannarino, who's his opponent for the first round, has been awful since arguably the Australian Open. Mannarino has lost 8 straight matches. Doesn't matter the surface. On clay, we know he's really, really bad. On grass, we know he's usually good. He was not good this year, and he's been bad on hard court as well. So Mannarino has kind of been an auto fade, and Borges has been in good form. So I do think Borges will potentially outlast him in either a 3-set marathon, or if Mannarino once again just looks out of sorts and Borges buries him. But Borges has won 4 of his last 5 matches, including Cincinnati qualifying, so he has been accustomed to the courts here, having to go through qualifying, and he beat some good competition in the qualifying, so I do like his overall form on these courts in particular. So to mention the actual guys that he's beaten, I want to quickly pull it up. I believe Kekmanovic was one of those guys, so he has beaten some recognizable players on hard court who are pretty good, guys that are at least in much better form than Mannarino is right now. But he ended up beating a Wolf in 3. Sorry, I ended up making up Kekmanovic. He beat Kekmanovic in Montreal. Beat Wolf in 3 in Cincinnati, and ended up beating Vukic in straight sets, who's been fine for the last couple months. In Montreal, though, ended up beating Kekmanovic, beat Humbert. So 2 pretty solid wins there, and then ended up losing to Nishikori. But he's been in good form. I like how he's played. Mostly a blind fade of Mannarino, who's just been awful. So I am going to go with that. Until Mannarino wins a match, I might keep fading him, keep throwing into parlays until it ends up losing. So once again, my plays for the first round, the lock's going to be a parlay. Sorry, I didn't go through the dog. My lock once again is going to be Lehecka money line and Borges money line in a parlay at -129. For the dog, I am going to go to a very basic play between 2 Americans. Opelka's taking on Shelton. I think you know where I'm going here. Give me the first set tiebreak at +125. Both players we know are very good at serving. We know Shelton can be a bit vulnerable at times if the first serve percentage does dip. Opelka, though, is really not a good returner. He never has been. It's why he is not a consistent threat to win many tournaments, because he really can't return. But both guys we know are great at serving. Both guys are really not that good at returning. And Shelton's had a bunch of first set breakers recently. He's had a first set tiebreak in 4 of his last 7. But Opelka, we know when healthy, is arguably the best server on tour. Shelton, when he is on, can be an elite server. He was serving relatively well in Montreal. There were a bunch of breaks in general, just based on the pace of the courts. I see both guys really struggling to generate any break point chances early in this match. You might get breaker, but if I told you that this match went to a breaker in the first set and there were 0 break points in that first set, I think none of you would be shocked. So give me the 2 good servers who are also bad at returning to go to a breaker in the first set at +125. So once again, my lock and dog picks for the show. The lock's going to be on a 2-pick parlay. Give me Lehecka money line, parlay with Borges money line at -129. And for the dog, I am going to go with Opelka and Shelton first set tiebreak, or first set over 12.5 games at +125. A reminder, since it is a 1,000, we'll be back once again for the second round in a day or 2. Until next time, though, find me on Twitter at Reichel Radio. Find me on the NBA show. Find me on the MLB show as well. Until next time, good luck to all of you and all of your bets. Bye, everyone.